I've had a lot of fun looking at different video game companies from the early 80s. Companies like CBS Electronics, Imagic, US Games, Games by Apollo, 20th Century Fox, and so on. The big difference between those companies and the one that we're going to talk about today is I don't own the actual games, so I had to go and find another way to play them. We're going to be talking about Wizard video games, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the controversy with those games. Wizard Video had something going for them that several of these other countries didn't have. They had the rights to several movies. A bunch of them, actually. The problem is they had the rights to a bunch of exploitation movies and low-budget horror films. So, yeah, they had an advantage of having a lot of IP, but the problem is no one really wanted a video game based on a lot of these movies, even though some of them would have been really awesome. They had the rights to movies like Kung Fu Brothers in the Wild West and Robot Holocaust, but they also had the rights to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I Spit on Your Grave, Miss Nude USA, Miss Nude America, and several of the Emmanuelle movies, as well as a few of those wonderful movies from the 1970s that were best described as a group of white people who are pretending to be Americans but are really Italians, go to South America, wander around in the jungle for a bit, and then go home, if they're not eaten by cannibals. You might be wondering how this movie company got into video games. Well, they were a subsidiary of Empire International Pictures. Empire would eventually shut down Wizard in 1988, but before that, they were used to bring over a bunch of movies to just kind of fill in drive-ins and lower-budget theaters. And they did a really good job of it. They were gone in 1988, but they were also brought back in the 2010s, and I'm not really sure what happened to them after that. They've basically been used as a publishing label for a bunch of different movies over the years, and the rights have kind of gone around the block a few times. That is not something I'm going to be talking about in any length in this. Basically, one rabbit hole at a time. I don't want to drop down that one any further than I already did while I was researching these games. Wizard Video Games actually published 3 games. 2 of them are for the Atari 2600, and 1 was for home computers. The 2 Atari 2600 games, Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, are the more important ones, or at least the ones that get a lot more coverage, because the third is just a movie trivia game and has most likely been lost to time. You don't hear anyone talk about it because it's just a movie trivia game, and it's really not all that important. Wizard was the publisher of these games. They did not actually develop them. They didn't even have an in-house development team. They contracted it out to a company called VSS, which I'll get more into later, but they were made up of some former developers from Games by Apollo. Both of these games are what you should expect from an Atari 2600 game from this time. They have no end goal, and you're just playing for a high score. However, they were also rather graphic for Atari 2600 standards. Both games have pixelated blood and human-looking sprites. It is still an Atari 2600, so you kind of need to use your imagination a little bit, but not as much as other games. You definitely know that there are people in this game, and you know that they're being killed. Maybe Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a little bit more confusing on that, because I'm not entirely sure what's happening to the lady when all of a sudden it turns into just a mess of pixels and nonsense. These are two early examples of horror video games, and they're kind of significant when you think about it. The reviews of these games that I found are kind of interesting, to say the least. They're really all over the place. Halloween did a little bit better, just because the people playing it weren't as freaked out by walking around killing people, at least people that actually look like people. And they did say that the music was a lot better and the graphics were a lot better in Halloween. Texas Chainsaw Massacre's reviews were much more critical. Well, not all of them really give a score. A lot of those scores that are available are mostly like 2 out of 5s. At least I think that's the grading scale they're going on. Some of these are a little awkward to read at times. And it is clear that the people reviewing it had no idea what the movie Texas Chainsaw Massacre was about, which is fine because the people making the game didn't know what the movie was about either. So, yeah, I guess everybody's pretty much on the same page with that one. So while I was researching these games, things quickly got out of hand when I tried to figure out where the controversy surrounding Texas Chainsaw Massacre started. I fell into a really strange feedback loop of just absolute insanity and terrible sourcing. It really felt at times that this was just something that was created by the internet and was repeated enough to be perceived as a fact. I think there really was a controversy surrounding both of these games, but just from looking into it for the brief time that I did, I have no idea where it started or who started it. It's really bizarre, and I think some of the evidence has just been lost to the internet, and I would have to go to an archive and look up more newspaper articles, essentially, because I can't seem to find them just when I'm looking them up online. The first time that I heard about these games and heard about some of the controversy around them was on the Angry Video Game Nerd. That was in, I believe, 2007, but I might have that date wrong, where he said game stores didn't want to actually stock this game because of the images on the back and because of the blood and everything, and that led to poor sales. I found that repeated multiple times, especially in the 2010s, and when I went to go look for it, so I started out on Wikipedia, which isn't necessarily a great place, but at least it points you in the right direction. The Wikipedia article for Texas Chainsaw Massacre cites someone's blog as being the source for it. So I was like, okay, this person may or may not have a source on their blog. Well, I found the text on their blog where they talk about it, and they did source it. They sourced the Wikipedia article. So you have this wonderful loop where it's mentioned on this blog, Wikipedia sources that blog, and the source for the blog's information is Wikipedia. So, yeah, that was wonderful. And then I just fell into more insanity where everyone seems to be repeating roughly what is on that blog from 2008, and no one seems to be citing an original source for it. It's all these secondary and tertiary sources. So the answer to it is probably out there somewhere. I wasn't able to find it just by looking up the different information or looking up the controversies on it. And it doesn't stop there. It gets more annoying. So I initially thought, hey, maybe it's in some of the reviews. Maybe the reviews from 1983, maybe they talk about it. No, they don't bring up any retailers not wanting to stock the games back then. And that was kind of frustrating, but I shouldn't have been surprised by it. So I went back to look at a few more things to try to find more modern reviews of these games to see if they actually cite that. And I couldn't find any review from today or from basically 1998 onwards that is citing anything about the controversy from back in the 80s. The earliest reviews that I found are allegedly from 1998 because I'm told that they're on All Games. So I go to All Games, which is a defunct website, but archive.org has it, and I tried to find the Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre reviews on them, and they don't exist. So if All Games did cite a reason for why these games had poor sales, it's lost to the internet. And without me going to an actual archive or going to like a university library where I could look up some of the newspaper articles from the 80s, I'm probably not going to find it, unless somebody who's listening to this and cares enough has the answer. And if you do, please let me know in the comments. So Wizard Video Games was just the publisher for these games. And yeah, they were made by a company called Video Software Specialist, or VSS. This was a company that was made up of former Games by Apollo employees. They made a few games for various consoles over the years, and it's kind of cool to see that they, kept doing what they were doing and tried to make really good games. Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween were both made by them, and no, the lead developer was not very proud of them. And it didn't seem like they knew what they were doing when it came to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just because they had never seen the movie before. And yeah, from an interview that the lead developer, who was at VSS at the time, said, they weren't very proud of these games, or at least he wasn't. The interviewer didn't get into the controversy around these games, which is kind of understandable. This interview is from about 15 years ago at this point, so it is a little old, but it's still a pretty good source of information for really everything about Games by Apollo and a little bit of development in the 1980s. It's a really good interview, and it's one that I would recommend people checking out, because there's a lot of information in there. This has been a pretty interesting journey to look at these two games that really aren't anything special, and I guess I can say they caused controversy because I have no reason to think that they didn't. I just need to go and find the source and do some more research on them, which I might do at some point. But these were two of the first horror games, and they were some of the games that had more graphic content than anything else at the time. I would compare them to Exidy's Death Race, which also had its own controversy, but at least it had a better documented controversy than this one, where most of the stuff seems to be coming from 2000 and onward, instead of from back in the 1980s. Well, I can't really find the evidence that I want to really talk about the things that I think are really important with these games. I think it's still pretty cool that, they got made. So as I wrap this up, I'm still left with that big question of where the controversy started. And I don't have an answer at this point. I just have a lot of people repeating the same thing, and no one really providing a concrete source for where they got their information, which is pretty much standard for the internet at times. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you have any more information on this, I would love to hear it. I'll talk to you all later. Bye.